Thanks for joining me on a no doubt a busy Friday afternoon. Appreciate your time. We're going to give a brief and somewhat basic introduction, but just to get you started into the world of visual automated regression testing. And really looking about how you can use that within your existing automation. Okay, so if you've already got some existing functional UI automation tests, it's about, or from our perspective anyway, it's about getting the most reuse of those and extending their use, using them for different purposes, different types of testing. And in this case, using them for visual checking. All right. So that's what we're going to be talking about. I think it makes sense to start with getting a clear understanding, if you don't already have it, of what visual bugs actually are. Sounds kind of obvious, I guess, but there are many different representations of these across different types of applications, different types of visual bugs, different levels of severity as well, depending upon the business that owns the application. Okay, so we grade visual bugs potentially differently depending on the app and the organization. So we'll look at what visual bugs are. And then we'll look at what visual regression testing is, the things you can do in order to find these visual bugs. Okay, so maybe you've done some manual visual testing before. Maybe you've picked up a device, or you've kind of worked with the different browsers on your local machine, and maybe that's been a sporadic exercise. You've done it occasionally, but it's not a frequent part of your design, develop, test and release process. But really we're going to look at how we start to bring this in scope for our automation testing. All right, so automated visual regression testing, and as part of doing that, it's probably important to understand how it works under the hood. All right, so there's a variety of tools, and we'll take a look at a few of them, including Test-Evolve Spark, of course. But understanding how they work under the hood is kind of key to probably implementing this successfully. All right. Now, depending on the type of organization you're part of, you work for, presumably you're here maybe because you're a developer or you're a tester within a delivery team. Why should you consider this for your practice, for your organization, for your applications, for your projects? They may all be different. One project's different to the next, but you're likely working with a common set of applications that you own and you develop, you update and you release to your customers. So why should you start to embrace this? So we'll start to look at that. And then finally, as I said, there's a number of tools out there. There's kind of 3, 4, 5, maybe big players in the industry. Visual automation testing's got a lot more traction in recent years. It wasn't always something that people considered that they could automate, and of course, we now very much know that that's not the case. So we'll look at a small selection of tools and how you make use of that to look at the concept of a visual check that's just been made, and really what we're trying to assess, as we are with any kind of testing, does your actual result match up or live up to your expected result, your requirement, your source of truth, if you like. So and then it's one thing to develop the tests and run them locally, but it's another thing to run them as part of your CI/CD pipeline. So with all of these things, especially if you already have a well-established pipeline for your functional automated tests, this should just be part of that process to incorporate these new visual automated regression tests as an extension of that pipeline. So in the way that the tests are run, in the way that we generate the reports off the back end, and ultimately in a way that allows you to make a decision as to whether there's been a visual regression, there's a bug, there's an unexpected change, something that needs to be raised. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about. So let's get started. Let's consider what visual bugs actually are. Okay, there's a few examples there. So I think the first thing that highlights is that we could be talking about a web application in a browser. We could be talking about a standard mobile app. We could be talking about an older school, more of a legacy desktop application. Or we could be talking about, kind of the native operating system on a mobile device, for example. But any aspect of an application with a UI that is key to the experience of the user, um, has the potential, or can be susceptible to visual bugs. And really, what we're talking about here is changes that were not intended, things that we're not expecting, with regards to the visual appearance of the user interface. Now, there's different versions of that. Okay, so we could be looking at entire layout shifts. We could be looking at CSS issues on a web app, styling issues. The branding of the website, the way it's meant to be displayed to its customers. We might start to see the complete omission, or of elements completely missing altogether between one build or another. We might start to see a misalignment of elements, or the overlapping of elements. Or we could be looking at broken images, broken icons. If we take a responsive application and we move from a browser to a mobile device, we're looking at it on mobile browser. Does that start to introduce layout issues? Anything that is clearly perceived as a kind of a visual anomaly, something we're not expecting, following a new build to an environment of that application, is something we're going to look at as a potential visual bug. We might see differences between different browsers, different operating systems, right? So differences between Safari versus Firefox versus Chrome versus Edge, for example. It could also be down to things as, on the face of it, as simple as incorrect fonts, colors of certain things. Again, I guess we could put this in the styling camp to some degree, but also content changes as well. So there could be unexpected content changes. For example, maybe there's a particular error message and it's missing a key, so you see some of the underlying code implementation instead of the error message that the user should actually see in a certain situation. So all of these can be examples of visual bugs. Okay, so on the face of it, they may not be the most serious issues that we as developers and testers are going to see. But really, we want to start thinking a little kind of more broadly than that, and understanding, okay, well, what might be the problem with some of these? And really, it comes down to user experience. Okay, a brand is everything these days, and we very much live in a mobile first world. Okay. So this is going to be your first port of call for your customers, and one of the first things they see. So these visual bugs, depending on where they are and what they do and what kind of annoyance they can provide, they can really, really diminish your users' experience of your application. All right, that in turn could increase their frustration. If you think about it, at a slightly higher level, depending on your brand values, you might have customers that start to lose a bit of respect for you as a brand and what you're trying to do with your application, what you purport to be, what are your brand values. There's something about an online shopfront, storefront effectively, that says if I'm not concerned sufficiently about quality there, does that cast aspersions on quality of my other products, my physical products that maybe I actually stock in a store, for example. So people do tend to start thinking like this sometimes. That sounds maybe a little bit dramatic, but it's not unheard of. So from a web app point of view, you may if you look at your analytics, you may see that your bounce rate starts to increase if people are frustrated with their experience on your website. And ultimately, if you're looking at a commerce type of application that is a primary source of revenue for your organization, you could well start to see a downturn in that revenue, some losses. And what's the worst ultimate thing? Well, people that may have been loyal customers until now may start to look elsewhere. Okay, they may switch brands. So ultimately, it's all about the dollar or the pound sign as far as if you're using your application as a source of revenue, it can be as far-reaching as that. And the one key thing here as well, your existing functional automated tests are not designed to pick up these kinds of issues. Okay, so I typically always refer to an end-to-end checkout flow on an e-commerce website, for example. So if we think about Amazon or eBay or whatever, you might have some visual bugs there, but your functional test could sail through that completely unaffected, as long as it can, for example, hit the homepage, search for a product, pick a particular search result, add it to cart, start that checkout flow, filling a billing and a shipping address form, etc., etc., complete the payment method and confirm that order. Now that may still all be entirely possible, but it could be littered with visual bugs. All right, so these visual bugs will usually pass a functional test, and this is where we start to see the gap. Okay. So how do we start to counter that then? So we look at what visual regression testing is. So it's another string to our bow. It's really an extension, or it should be an extension of what we do. We'll talk about some tools in a second. But the fundamental process is such that you establish the idea of a baseline image. So after the latest build, you establish the idea of a baseline image of a particular page or a section within your application. Okay, and this baseline image is considered to be your expected result, your source of truth, your requirement, if you will, for how this page or this part of the application should continue to look after subsequent builds and deployments of that application to an environment where you're testing. All right, so single source of truth, that's your baseline image. When we execute a visual regression test after a subsequent build, depending on the tool you're using, what's going to happen essentially is it's going to look at that page against multiple browsers, different viewports, different sizes, etc. It's going to start to capture new screenshots of that particular part of the application. And simply it's going to compare them to the baseline that you already established. Okay, so you've got image A and image B. It's going to look at the differences between them, if there are any. The differences that it finds will be highlighted. And ultimately there'll be some reports that are generated. And the idea then is that as a developer or a tester, you are at the end of that test run, you're going to look at those reports. Human inspection at this stage. All right, so it's not completely automated. There is some human interaction there. But your job, and this is almost like training the tool to some extent, you are going to either accept or reject, pass or fail, those differences that have been witnessed in the comparison of the before and after images effectively. All right, so now there is some flexibility as well, because there are some obvious examples where depending on the type of site you're working with, one such example might be a kind of a carousel on the homepage of a website where you've got maybe rotating recommended products, for example. Maybe that's going to change every 3 to 5 seconds. So the chances of you hitting that exact same image the second time are slim, all right, low chances. So we have the idea of masks and tolerances, again, depending on the tools that you're using. But there are parts of a page that you can highlight, and you can effectively say, don't check this bit because I know full well that it could change. I'm expecting it to change. So it's actually the rest of the page around that I'm more concerned with. And then the idea of tolerances as well is that you may say, okay, the most strict type of checking would be I'm looking for 100% match between my baseline image and my secondary image, if you like. And so the differences that it highlights would be based upon that. Conversely, you may say, actually, I'm going to go for a 75% tolerance. And so it's still going to look at that page or the differences between them, but it's the things that it thinks it's seeing as differences, there'll be less of them that are recorded for your inspection if you have a kind of a more flexible tolerance, if you like, so kind of a 75%, rather than a 100% match requirement. So there are certain things you can do to add some flexibility to the process for areas where you know there are going to be differences from image A to image B. All right. Based upon your assessment of the differences that it finds. So with some tools, for example, you can then you can pass a build, right? So you accept the changes that you're seeing. You do your analysis and you say, yeah, that's fine. No worries there. I see why the differences are and I'm okay with that. And then the next time or the third time you run a test, if it then sees again that it's the same as the previous image, it can auto improve that on your behalf based upon your prior acceptance of those differences, if you like, okay, the differences between those two images. And then finally, so, there will be times, of course, where you have intended change. So if something fundamental about the color scheme, for example, the layout, the sections within a page, if you know that's going to change, of course, your visual regression tool is going to highlight those changes. But you, in advance of actually running that test, you can go in and recapture, re-establish your baseline images. So you update them to say, I know there's been a change. This is now my requirement. All right, this new image, this new version of the page, or this new image grab of my application is what I should be comparing against in the future. Okay. And then we continue to go through this this cycle. Okay, so we build to an environment, or we build a version of the app, and we run our tests, and we continue to go through this this process. All right, so that's really what visual regression testing is and how it works under the hood. In terms of why you might want to start considering it for your organization, so as I said, the world we're in now, your UI, your site, your application, this is your brand. This is your online brand. And for the majority of casual shoppers and even returning shoppers, it's going to be the first thing they see, probably way more than your physical storefront, if you do have such a thing. Okay. So it is your brand, right? This is, there's a reason to be precious over some of these. And as I say, a lack of care for aspects of your online user experience can imply a lack of care or a lack of concern for quality in other aspects of your business and your product, and that's not something you want. So yeah, why should we do it? Well, like any type of testing, it's going to allow for this early detection, in this case of visual bugs. Okay. And again, as with any type of automation, this is going to allow for a much quicker and a more repeatable process, right? So with other types of automation, as we know, and with the early detection of any bugs, and in this case visual bugs, this absolutely enables the reduction of time and effort and associated cost to find a fix for that. We all know that the earlier we find things in the testing cycle, the cheaper it is to fix. Once that bug's out there in production, it's significantly more costly from a development and delivery perspective, but also from a customer impact experience, from a support experience, potentially your help desks. Okay, so as we always say, as a tester, your job is constantly to provide that fastest feedback to your developers, and again in this case about visual regression bugs. Depending on the nature of your business, your application, you're going to make lots of changes that impact the UI, and so rather than your testing of these being a sporadic kind of manual exercise that you're not likely to repeat too often because it takes too long, it's too costly, you need too many people on the team to do it, you need too many devices, too many OSs, too many browsers, etc. Having this embedded within your automation, within your CI/CD pipeline, is a much more productive and effective way of doing this. Okay. Overall, this is going to lead to significantly improved consistency in your user interface, your customer's experience, as we said, across many browsers, many devices. And it's simply, for most people, most companies, it's just impractical to try and maintain or try and stay up to date, in step, in sync with your customers for the way in which they are experiencing your application. What devices are they using? What browsers, what operating systems are they using? Are they on Mac? Are they on Windows? Are they on a Samsung Galaxy S20? Are they on the latest iPhone? All right, so usually impractical for the majority of organizations. So testing this way can definitely help with that. All right, and I think ultimately all of this together means that you end up with significantly better, more expansive testing coverage, and it allows you to stay closer to the experience of your customers on your application. When we're building the applications, when we're designing requirements, when we are doing UI design, when we're building, when we're testing, we tend to have a very insular perspective on that application. We tend to step out of that kind of narrow perspective when we do greater exploratory testing, but that tends to be manual, of course. But when you can add another bow to your automation process, so not just functional automation, but visual regression testing as well, you do get significant reuse of your existing tests, much greater coverage. And as I said, this is something that is much more repeatable. You can do it on every single build of code to an environment multiple times a day. Whatever you need it to be then becomes possible. And so you're going to find these things a lot faster, you're going to save money, and you're going to keep your customers a lot happier, all the while protecting your brand. Okay, so we're going to look at some tools. Obviously we're here from Test Evolve, so I'm going to take 5-10 minutes, if you'll allow me, to talk about what we offer within our product set. Okay, but partly, two of the big players on the market are Applitools Eyes, but also Percy. So Percy now part of the browser stack product set. Both great tools. Okay, Applitools has been around for a long time, probably the market leader. Percy's now stepped in, doing a similar thing. But these are both SaaS offerings that can firmly be embedded within your CI/CD pipeline. They definitely incorporate the idea of kind of visual checks on commit and push and merge, and the ability to step into their tool to do the assessing to either approve or reject builds, of course. And then we'll look at what we offer with our localized visual regression testing, the reports that we produce, the way in which we can use the Test Evolve Flare recorder to very quickly build tests and add these visual checks. And then in our world, when we run those tests, what we see within our Halo dashboarding platform. Okay, but quite simply, regardless of your tool choice, the process should be as simple as 1, 2, 3. Okay, you build your functional automated UI tests. All right, we're talking about reuse of these. So as you see your automation test traverse across your application, whether it's desktop or mobile, a web app, a native mobile app, from screen to screen, wherever you are, you should really be able to just add a one-line command to just augment that test with a visual checking command. Okay. And then really you're then just running your test, you're firing up your visual engine of choice. We're going to be talking about Applitools, Percy, Test Evolve Spark, and then you're going into that review, that approve or rejection cycle, that rinse and repeat cycle. Okay, so this is what the process should be. It should be as straightforward as this, all right? And this is how it becomes an extension of what you are currently doing with your other automation efforts. Okay, so let's start looking at some code. Let's jump in and let's see how we actually get this stuff done. Cool. So I am going to use Test Evolve Flare now to just very quickly build out a brand new UI, functional automated test. So we're just going to use the Amazon website. Flare, actually, when you open a new project in Flare, it will also give you a local visual testing demo that you can run immediately, just so you can get a flavour of how this works straight away. But I'm going to show you how to kind of just build a new test and add visual checks to that test at the same time as you're building it. Okay, so we go to our develop module. Okay, so within Test Evolve we work with BDD and Cucumber as well. So I'm going to build a feature, and we'll call this the Amazon Visual Testing feature. We'll just call it Amazon Visual Testing, not feature. We'll approve that. Needs a scenario, so let's do homepage, search results, visual checks. Okay, not the best name scenario, but that's fine for now. Okay, we can just choose my cucumber or my gherkin keywords here. Okay, so given I go to the Amazon UK website, when I search for a product, then I can see the product details page. There we go, I had to think there for a second. All right, so I've created my feature, my scenario, my 3 steps of my BDD scenario, my gherkin steps given when then. Now I don't have any code yet. Okay, so let's go to the first step. It's going to give me the option to begin recording this test. All right, so we click on record. It's going to open a window down here for me. The first page you'll see here is our training page, if you like, for element inspecting, recognition, recording, etc. I'm doing this with Ruby right now. We also offer JavaScript integrations to Applitools and Percy. Okay. Anyhow, so let's click on record. I am going to go to www.amazon.co.uk. As I record that, as with most recorders, of course, it's going to capture my every interaction with the page. And then I can come in here in the window, and what I want to do is add a visual check, a visual test to the homepage itself. All right, so anywhere here I can just right click, and then I've got visual check. All right, so I'll just add a visual check here. With our visual checks, we say just give them a label, okay, and that just really gives it a sense of purpose. Where are you in the application? What page are you on? What's the purpose of this check? All right, so we'll just call this homepage. Get my spelling right. Good. We'll add that check, and again, that's going to be added with an icon on the left-hand side there. That's all we're doing here. Other than, in fact, no, second step, search for product. So let's open that. I just continue my recording. It's the middle of summer, so I am going to search for a deck chair. And I'm going to click on the magnifying glass. It's recording those actions for me. And then I'm on a results listings page effectively. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to right click. I'm going to left click on my visual check. I'll just call this results listings page. Add that check, and then I'm going to continue. But I'm going to move into the then step now, which focuses on really, or my intention was to have this then make a product selection. There we go. I like the look of that one. We'll click on this product here. It's going to take us to the PDP, or the product details page for you commerce people out there. And then same thing. I just want to add a third check, third page, third check. So right click, visual check, and I'm going to call this product details page. Whoa, spelling terrible today. Let's redo that. Getting worse. Let's do that again. product details page. There we go. All right, add check. And that's as far as I want to go. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording. And I can tag this if I want. So I can tag this for test selection. So we'll call this at Visual Demo. Enter that. Okay, so I've now got a tag against my scenario. I can tag across at the feature level as well. All right, so we now have an additional feature with a scenario. So the home page, the search results, visual checks, and expand that. I have a given, when, then step. Given I go to the Amazon UK website, when I search for a product, then I can see the product details page. Now what we're doing at each stage of those, as you saw on each of those 3 pages, we've added a visual check and we've added a label as well. And the reason for the label will become apparent in a second. All right, so there's our second visual check on our results listings page. And there is our third visual check on our product details page. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to look under the hood now. And from in this case, a Ruby perspective, let's go and see the kind of code we're using. Firstly, for this automated test using Ruby, but secondly, specifically around how we've added a single line of code on each of those pages to make that visual check. Okay. So now I have my recorded test. So I've just built a visual regression test using the test evolve Flare recorder. If I come back to the main screen now, you can see that I now have my Amazon visual testing feature amongst the other demo features that already exist when you create a new project. You'll recall that I gave it a tag of excuse me, visual demo, and our scenario was called homepage search results visual checks. We created these 3 steps. Excuse me. So let's have a look at the running of this. So I'm going to do it by tag selection. So I'll just use my visual demo tag to isolate this one particular test. I'll click on next, and we start to look at the run options that we have. Okay, so of course we're doing this as a visual test. All right, so I click on visual test. The 3 options I'm going to show you today. We'll start with test evolve, Spark, Flare and Halo, essentially doing it locally within the framework that we're using here. So I'll click on local. I need my browser. I'm not going to use a browser integration. I'm going to use my local browser to do this, to run the Amazon flow that we just built. So I'll click on local. Desktop, and I'm using Firefox a fair bit at the moment, so I shall select that. I build up my inventory on the right hand side. I can click on next. And then we're presented with our reporting options. So there's a few things we have here. We have a local test run report within Flare itself. Real-time failures report is going to show you the most commonly failing methods within classes, within tests, so kind of within the code, almost at a stack trace level. So very good for if you're running a large number of tests and you want to look for repeating patterns of failure. We have other reports, JUnit, JSON, for typically for CI/CD pipelines. We have an integration with TestRail if you're using that to manage your manual testing. But today we're going to focus on our test evolve Halo test reporting platform. Okay, so I select Halo. A few things I need to do here. I've already pre-filled the idea of a label, so you'll see why this is required in Halo in itself. And then I just need my API key just so I can push my test result data to my organization's Halo instance. Okay. If I was working with multiple environments within the code base, I could make that selection here, but I'm just working locally because we just recorded that Amazon code just now. Okay, so I'll show you the code in a second, but I'm going to run this test. Okay, so let's just kick this test off. We'll see some console output from Flare itself. We'll see some debugging information. So this is running the test that we just created. It's opening Flare. It's going to the home page. What it's going to be doing now is establishing some baseline images effectively. Okay, we're on the PDP, so we've been through our 3 pages. And then straight away, what I'm going to do is run that again. And then I'll show you the two the two runs back to back. So this has a test run passed, but what it was actually doing there under the hood, and you can see it in the console output here. So we can see no baseline currently exists for the label homepage. We've had a similar thing for results listings page, and we've had a similar thing for product details page. And then it tells you I'm saving a new screenshot as the baseline image, as we talked about for this visual test. Okay. And that's all that test did. I mean, functionally it moved through the application. Obviously it moved successfully from page to page, and then it created these baseline images on these 3 pages. So that was the establishing of our source of truth, or our expected results, if you like. Now, if I do exactly the same thing again, so now I've got a baseline. So now when I run this test, it's got something to compare to. Okay, so I'll run the test again. And off the back of this, I will show you all of the results output that we get, and we'll see what kind of comparison it makes. Now, this will take a little longer because now it's recapturing an image and it's also comparing it to the image from the first run. Okay, so it'll take a little longer on each step. It's still going to run the search. It goes to the results listings page. It's going to make a check here as well. Going to make the comparison. And then it's going to go to the product details page. Same thing. It's going to take another image and it's going to be busy making the comparison to the baseline image. Okay, when it's done that, it's then going to stop, and it's going to have a result. It'll be passed or failed. Now in this case, this has failed. So let's start to understand a little bit about why this has failed. So test evolve Spark. This is the console output, but within Flare. So it's going to tell you what's actually happened. So we can see here that the screenshot for the label, or for homepage, the homepage screenshot has a 40% pixel difference to its equivalent baseline image. All right, and then we see the same thing, but a different difference. So 36% for the results listings page, and then we see a similar thing here. Not quite as much though. Product details page, just a 4% pixel difference to its baseline image. And then it tells you down here, it says in the course of running that second test, it's made 3 comparisons, 3 image comparisons against 3 baseline images. It's found 3 mismatches, and therefore it's considered this visual test to have been a failure, and as a result it's failed this scenario. Okay. So let's start by looking in Halo now. Okay, so this is Test Evolve Halo. This is our reporting platform. Now you saw me enter my API key. I ran that test. What that means is that I've now received my test results within our cloud reporting platform. Okay. You also recall that I gave it a label within Flare. So I gave the test run a label. That was Visual Webinar Demo. Okay, so that helps me to find my data within Halo. Now, this is what we call a run card. It's going to show the latest set of results. So just 2 minutes ago, my most recent test finished. You can see I was running it on Firefox. I'm working on a Mac, Apple Mac. This is a desktop representation of the Amazon site, and I'm doing all of this locally. All right, so it's a browser test, and it's telling me in my latest run we made 3 checks and all 3 of them failed. There's a 0% pass rate on that last test. So let's have a look and let's see what this is actually telling us. So this is what we call a run view for a visual test, and there's a couple of things here. So we've run that test twice. Now if you recall, we ran the first test and I said to you all it was doing really was just establishing those 3 baseline checks. So it tells us down here, yep, I've made 3 checks. I consider the overall status of this test to be new because all I was doing was capturing baseline images. So 0 failures at this point. This is just a new run. This is setting the groundwork for tests that follow. So if I come back to the most recent test or the second test, this is now saying, okay, now I'm actually failing because I've made these 3 checks, my 3 checks have failed. I can see here that they're on the product detail page, the listings page, and the home page. 3 checks, 3 failures. The overall status of that test was a failure. Okay, so this is what we see in Halo itself. Okay, but let's just flip here now to what we have locally. Okay, so when I first recorded this test, what it's doing is essentially writing to my file system. Okay, that's what the recorder is doing. So I built a feature that you'll remember. We've just seen that in Flare as well. Here's the steps. If we start to look at this now, now I've made no attempt to implement a page object model or any of that good stuff here. Okay, this was just a quick record, so just we can show you some of these commands that are being executed. So as we said, we're working with BDD and Cucumber. So here is our kind of encapsulating given step. So I go to the Amazon website. It's comprised of a go-to command here. And the first thing I did then was to run a visual check, and we implemented that visual check as part of the recording process. If you remember, within Flare, I right-clicked, I added a visual check, and I also gave that visual check a label. So programmatically, it's written to our code base as testevolve.visualcheck. That's all it is, and we pass this label as well. This is some code that is simply clearing the cookies banner at the bottom of that homepage if it finds it, if it's present. And then we moved into the when step. So essentially we were searching for a product, as we can see there. If you've ever automated against the Amazon site, you'll be very, very familiar with this particular text field. So this is the search box, and it recorded a click into that box. It then recorded me setting my text of deck chair. It then recorded me clicking on the magnifying glass search icon, which took us to a results listings page. And then again, same thing, you'll remember that I, as part of the recording process, I instructed it to make another visual check on the second page of our flow this time, and I called that the results listings page. All right, and then very simply, we got to the results listings page. We saw a selection of results. I decided on a result that I wanted to click into to get to the product details page. So this is the code that's been generated to find that product, to make that selection. We were taken to the PDP, or the detail page, and then we made a third visual check. Okay, so this is the kind of code that's being generated by the recorder in this instance. But quite simply, it's this one line here. Now we've got three iterations of this, but it's this one line of code that you simply add on any particular page within your automation flow to then make that visual check. And then what you just saw me do was actually configure that test to run within Flare itself. I chose a visual test. I set up my Halo reporting, which we just had a look at. But I'm showing you the code, but what I also want to show you here is the fact that we also get some local reporting. Okay. So within the visual testing folder here, we get the 3 baseline images that were captured. There you go. So homepage, that's the product details page, doing it alphabetically. And actually that was the results listings page. Okay. Now you'll recall we ran the test twice. Once was just to generate the baseline. So that will be this one here. So we get a visual test report, and this is just another version really of what you see in Halo. But if I right click on that, we can open this in the browser. There you go. So we can see that the baseline images that were captured here, okay, on each of the screens, one each within each of the 3 steps. So these are our baseline images, and it says no baseline existed for this particular label. Labels represented in blue here. And so the status of this run, or this version of the test, was just new baseline created. All right, now if I come back to the second run that I then did, second set of results, now I actually have some results. Okay, so here it's captured additional images. So at the time it's running the test, it's captured these images, and I now have a visual test report. And this is where I'm going to come within TestEvolve locally to understand, okay, you failed the test. What is the problem, right? Where are the differences? So this is the second time that the test was run. So as we saw in Halo, this is marked the scenario as a failure. and it's telling us there are visual regressions, or what it considers to be visual regressions. And it's now for me to look at what it's telling me and to make that determination as to whether there's a genuine problem. All right, so for each of the steps, as we saw, we just had baselines before, but now we've got an actual image that was captured on the second run, and we've got a representation of the differences between those two images. Okay, now clearly when I did this there was nothing wrong with the site, but there is sufficient difference for a variety of reasons between the two images to demonstrate the concept of this visual testing and how it's going to flag differences that it sees to you for you to make that kind of determination. So on our homepage, well, we can see clearly we had a kind of a grey Alexa banner at the top on the baseline image. That wasn't there when we made that second check, and that is all represented within the red areas in the difference screenshot, or the difference representation on the right hand side. So the Alexa banner is different. Actually, if you look at the images themselves are different as well, and they are being highlighted as such. The text above the images is also different, so that is also being highlighted. And even within the cookies banner, if you look carefully, you can see that it was kind of grey or white, the two buttons within the cookies banner in the baseline image over here. And then upon the second test, it was actually yellow. So that has been flagged as a difference, along with a slight difference in some text there. So clearly, yeah, as I say, we know there's nothing wrong, but this is a good way of kind of demonstrating to you how it sees these differences. And then it's done a similar thing on the listings page. Now, what I would suggest here is that the page was probably loading, so it's sliding in. So there is whilst to my eye at least, for the most part, it does look the same. Actually, I think there's a page load aspect here as to why this is registering as having differences. We look at the physical positions of some of these deck chairs at the bottom here. Okay, but one thing you can definitely see is different. In the top left here, it says free delivery on your first order within the baseline image, and in the actual image it says prime wardrobe, I think it is, try before you buy. So in the top right hand side here, it's showing a difference for you to then go and check out. Okay, and then actually the one that only had a 4% difference was our product detail page. So again, I think there's a page loading aspect here, that the image wasn't quite in place as it was in the baseline. So probably a few pixels out, which is why the deck chairs are, and some of the thumbnails are registering. But a similar thing here in the top right hand side, okay, to show you that the text, or just that part of the banner at the top, was actually different. So in terms of a workflow, it's now up for me to look at this. Within Test Evolve, we don't have the concept of kind of approving or failing builds. We'll look at that shortly with our Percy and Applitools integrations. But certainly when I do this locally, this is the place where I come to start understanding if there are any differences when I've actually run that test. Okay. So we just focused on running visual tests, visual checks within your automation as part of Test Evolve, Spark and Flare locally, both with local HTML reports, but also with our Halo reports platform in the cloud. What we're going to do now is flip over to in turn each of the two integrations that we have for visual testing. Okay, so one is with Applitools Eyes, and one is with Percy, which is now part of the Browser Stack family. Okay, and the key thing really here to note is that the code that I'm using to do this check doesn't change at all. Okay, it's simply the way in which I'm now going to run the test. So you saw earlier on that we're just either through the Test Evolve Flare recorder or through just adding a line of Ruby code. We're just adding that one line of code with a label to denote the purpose of the check or the location of the check, and you can do that on a page by page basis as you kind of traverse your application within your automation test. So I think we covered homepage, results listing page, and product detail page. All right, so that doesn't change. I'm just running this differently now. So I'm going to select my visual test integration. I'm going to choose Applitools this time. I do need a browser. Really, the main thing I need is an API key for my plan or my subscription with ApplyTools. So that is a requirement. You to use this integration, you will need some kind of plan with ApplyTools or with Percy in the one that we're about to look at. There are a bunch of other parameters here that are ApplyTools or integration specific. Most of these I'm not going to touch on in this webinar. Okay, so these are well documented within the on the ApplyTools site. So if you do decide that ApplyTools is going to be your engine of choice, obviously you can gain a much clearer understanding of the purpose of these parameters on the ApplyTools documentation side of things. Okay, but obviously, yes, things like branches are going to refer to how you manage your visual testing with regards to your CI/CD pipeline and builds and branches, etc. The ones I'm going to look at today, so viewport width, so these can be important because what you need to know here is that this is going to override your default kind of browser settings, okay, because of the virtue of the fact we're using the ApplyTools integration. Okay, so I've got my API key. I'm happy with my viewport width and height. I'm not going to change any of the other parameters, as I say. I'm going to select a local browser. It's desktop. I'm going to use Firefox again. And then, as always, we can see our inventory of run parameters is shown to us on the right-hand side of TestEvolve Flare here. I'm going to click Next. And this is just my reporting again. So I'm not going to make any changes here. We'll still push our results to Halo, but really the focus of where we're going to go once this test runs is to step into the actual ApplyTools application and see what that's telling us. All right, so right now TestEvolve is just my test runner, if you like, but making use of the ApplyTools engine for the visual comparisons. All right, so let's kick it off. To all intents and purposes, it's going to look the same. Okay, so within Flare, you're going to see the console output. It's going to make reference to the fact that it's using ApplyTools. You can see here, this was my default browser. It's now resized to my ApplyTools specific parameters that I passed through. Now, what ApplyTools is going to do is going to look at the entire page. So you can see this kind of scrolling activity happening here. Okay, so it's going to take a little longer. It's running slightly differently. And ultimately, it will then submit the same search term. There we go. So looking for deck chairs. So we're on the results listings page now. I've still got a line of code here that's telling it to make that check. But again, ApplyTools is actually going to scroll down the entire page so it gets a complete representation. So we'll let that do its thing. It's then going to select a product. You remember we chose a specific product in order to move across to the product details page. So we'll wait for it to do that. And this is the first time we're actually running the test through the ApplyTools integration. So again, ApplyTools has the same concept of needing to establish a baseline. Okay, so I'm now to my product details page. It's always, regardless of the engine you use, it's always the idea of having a baseline and a new image to compare against. So the first thing you're going to do with any engine is establish that baseline. We've got 3 checks in this test. We're now on the final page, which is our product details page. This is where we're going to make subsequent checks, the third of our 3 checks. But as I say now, right now, it needs to capture that initial baseline. Okay, when it's finished, it will close. There we go. So we have a passed test as far as TestEvolve, Spark and Flare are concerned. We can see a little bit of information, ApplyTools specific here. All right, so we can see here in our logs that the ApplyTools first time complete for the name of our scenario. And it tells you that you can review the baseline images here. Okay, then it's going to give you a link that you can go to within ApplyTools. Okay, in this case, I've already got the page open, so let's just step into ApplyTools. My kind of refresh icon is active there, so it's telling me that new results have come in. So I'm just going to load the latest batches as it tells me here. I can see here on the 4th of August at the time and the date that I've just run the test. I can click on this. All right, so we can see that I've got now 3 baseline images. So I'm in the ApplyTools application. We can see it has a status of new, so similar to the way we saw it in Test Evolve Spark. This is a new test, it's just establishing baselines. Here is the name of my scenario that's been passed through from Test Evolve Spark and Flare. We didn't make any changes to the branch, so that's set to default. The OS is, of course, the machine that I'm working on. That was the browser that I selected. You'll recall that I set viewport of 1000 by 800. Okay, so we've got 3 baseline images, and that's really, the purpose of that first run. I can click into these, but you'll see now where it did do this, the scrolling on the page. It's captured. This was the home page from top to bottom. All right, so it's got absolutely everything there. There's our cookies banner still at the bottom there. Okay, that was 1 of 3. That's the home page. Let's close that. We can now, this is even longer, but let's step into the results listings page. So it says there, you can see actually step 2 out of 3, the results listings page. So again, it's using the labels that we gave it within that single line of code and passing that through via our Applitools integration, so you know exactly where you are. You see their branch default, as we said, but app, so we didn't give it a name in the parameters, but if you had have done, this is where you would see that as well. Okay, so I can click on that. Obviously at this level, it's kind of very, very, very small. But it's captured that entire representation of that particular page, if you like. Open in step editor. Yeah, there we go. Okay, moving on. So we'll just look finally at 3 of 3. This was our product details page. Again, the labeling information is being passed across through to the step. Our scenario name sits there within the test. Everything else remains the same. So I can click on that, and this is the product details page. As we can see for that particular deck chair product. Okay. Now it hasn't run a subsequent comparison, so I'm not looking for areas of difference right now. I don't have that. I just have my baseline images. Okay, but next we'll look at what happens when I run that test a second time. All right. Okay, so we are now back in Test Evolve Flare. So I'm now going to come back. I'm now going to run that test again. All right, so I've got my baseline images. Now I actually want to make a comparison. So I'm not changing anything about the run configuration. So still Applitools, still with the options that we saved before. Absolutely fine. So let's leave that as it is. I'm going to click next. I'm not changing anything about my reporting output. I'm just going to run that test again. Okay. So back to the console output. Really what we're now looking for it to do is to start capturing new images and making comparisons. So the viewport will be the same. So it comes back down to 1000 by 800. And it's going to do exactly the same thing. Okay, so we're going to scroll through. We're going to capture some new images. It's going to submit its search term. There we go. It will scroll again. It's got to capture the same size, dimensions of image, of course, to be able to make a fair comparison. So it will always do this scrolling. This is a big page, as you imagine. This is a results listings page. What I'm probably expecting to see is that this is where we'll see some red markers when it comes to looking at the latest image versus the baseline image. We've got a lot of dynamic content on this page, which is why it's a really, it's a good example to show you guys. But equally, it's a big page, so it takes that little bit longer to capture that image and to make that comparison before it then moves on to this product details page. All right, not as big, but still going to scroll from top to bottom. Okay, we'll capture a new image. The engine's going to make that comparison. And then we'll see what Applitools is actually telling us. Okay. Wait for it to finish. There we go. We can see the console output. Cool. All right, so the test is finished. Let's go and take a look at what's happening in Applitools. I'm now within the ApplyTools Eyes web app. Okay, so one thing of note, this was the run here that we used to create our baseline images. So what I have to do as a user, and I've now done this, which is why this this says passed. Okay, but I select this test and I select here. And what I went through and did was to go through and accept my baseline images, okay, as the source of truth for any subsequent runs that come through. Okay, so when we just ran our second version of the test, as we saw in Test Evolve Spark and Flare previously, we now have a test that's come through with some results, with some new images, and it has a status of unresolved. Okay, because this is the point that I now need to go in. And we can already see at thumbnail level that it's found differences, as we would expect, okay, because we're working with a dynamic page. But the point here is to kind of demonstrate that process of how you review a build effectively. So I can see purple in each of those images. So ApplyTools is asking me to confirm the status of this latest run. So I click into my first image. I've got a magnifying glass here. I can click in and we should have let the page load in, but you'll have full resolution on these images. All right, so yeah, again, for the purposes of this test, I know there's nothing wrong with this page. It's not my it's not my application. It's not for me to say it's right or wrong, but really what I can do in terms of understanding the ApplyTools workflow is to say, okay, there's as there was in our Test Evolve Spark reports, the areas of difference are highlighted for you. Okay, so I'd simply go through, I'd scroll through something there. This is a different, probably an H2, maybe something there. So as we said at the very start of this, it's not just necessarily visual imperfections, it can be content that's not the same as well. So if you've got a different H2, for example. All right, we've got headers, we've got image differences there. They're all highlighted. There's something in that section below there. Okay, so that's the first of my 3 images. So that was a newly captured image on the second run. I click into the results listings page now. Let's just zoom in on that. It's going to take a little while. So you can see actually why it takes some time to capture these images. It's capturing the whole page in obviously the resolution that it needs to be able to do this accurately. Let's just scroll to the top there. All right. So actually, the top of the page, appears absolutely fine. But yeah, clearly, it's just looking at where these differences appear. What we're seeing here, it tends to be images and kind of heading or section headers, I would say. Okay, so it's for you as a user to then go through and say, no, I'm expecting that, that's fine, or that's not a problem, that's a dynamic kind of a shifting area of the page. And as we do say, it's the idea of masks and tolerance, which I'm not going to cover specifically here in this webinar. But if you did have a carousel on your page, for example, that you knew was going to be constantly shifting, then you could mark that as something to be excluded for the comparison. Okay, and let's just have a look at our product details page. Zoom in there. There we go. So just blocks of images, or in this case, kind of video play thumbnails. But I think you get the general idea. Okay, so it's going to highlight those differences for you. Now I'm going to assume, hey, I'm absolutely fine with all of that. I've looked at it and there was nothing of any concern there. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to accept those changes. Okay, and that now has a status of passed. On the right hand side here, I can just save all changes in a batch. In fact, I'll do save selected tests only. That's what I just did. And that's just a very kind of basic introduction to the equivalent process within ApplyTools itself. Okay. Now, if I did a third run and it came through with exactly the same representation, there is the concept of ApplyTools doing an auto approve for you, because you approved a baseline, you approved a subsequent run. If the third run comes through and there's no changes, then it can, and it will auto approve that for you. Okay, so that's basically how ApplyTools works. All right, so we can take a look at Percy now. I'm back in Test Evolve Flare again. Once more, no changes to the code, no changes to the test. I'm simply going to start using the Percy integration this time. Okay. Yep, still in the browser. Let me just go and get my Percy API key. There we go. So less options to concern yourselves with on Percy than I think there are with Applitools. So similar tools but slightly different flavors. So for now, I'm just going to pop in my API key. I need a browser, local, desktop. I'm going to run that on Firefox as usual. Okay, there's my inventory. So exactly the same thing, but using a Percy integration this time. All right, so let's click on next. And we're still outputting to our reports as we normally do. So let's run that. We'll see the console again. Again, with Percy, you would need a flavor of subscription with Browser Stack Percy. Okay, these things tend to work with a number of runs or numbers of minutes on a monthly basis. All right, now Percy works slightly differently in the sense that it will actually capture the DOM from your application, and it will actually upload that to a Percy instance. So each of these three versions of visual regression testing operating in a slightly different fashion. Okay. So there we go, we're starting Percy. I'm on a slightly older version, as you can see there, but not a problem. So it's still going to open the browser. Now before, it was actually resizing it because that was an Applitools thing, but it's not doing that here. Percy works differently, as we say. So to all intents and purposes, it's running through that automation test as you would typically see. Okay. We're on our product detail page now. It's still going to run the checks in the same three places. All right, so I can see there my test has passed. We're just again dealing with baselines at the moment. So a few things of note there. I can see, let's have a quick look. So test-of flare tells us that Percy has started. It tells us that a homepage snapshot was taken. It tells us that a results listing page and then a product detail page snapshots or baseline images were taken. Okay, that was all successful. It then tells me Percy has been stopped successfully and a build has been finalized, and there is a URL I can go to. Okay, so let's step straight into Percy. Let's have a quick look. And there we go. So build number 454. So this has come through just a minute ago. This is my Percy instance. What does it tell me? Okay, well, I've got an unreviewed build essentially, but it does tell me I've got 3 snapshots, 3 unreviewed snapshots. Let's click into that and see what it's telling us. Again, it's essentially asking me to approve the build. This same workflow, this same process is a constant regardless of the engine that you're using. I've got my 3 snapshots, as you can see, so I can click on any one of these. Here's my home page. Here is my results listings page. Here is my product detail page, my PDP. So on the left, 3 unreviewed. By default, it's kind of made this this baseline capture across 3 browsers. All right, so we've taken and uploaded the DOM to Percy, okay, and it's considered that, or it's assessed those baseline images against 3 browsers, but also 2 different viewports here. So I can, if I want to look at how that would be represented in Chrome, I can do that. Here it is in Firefox. Here it is in Edge. I can do that for any one of my 3 snapshots or baselines, and I can also look at it on a not a different viewport, but a different resolution, if you like. Okay. Right, so really all I need to do is just go through and just approve this build, and that would be the first step in the process. All right, so if I go back to the home page, I can now see that that's considered an approved build. All right, we'll just go. We'll go and rerun those tests now and see what that comparison process looks like. Once more, we are back in test-of flare. I'm just going to step back. We did our first push to Percy, so we're just going to repeat that process. Okay, so again, nothing changes. We've got our baseline images. I've got my API key. Choose local, desktop, Firefox. Just building that run up again. No changes to reporting output. I'm going to run that test. And we're going to do the same thing, same 3 pages, same 3 checks. This time we're looking for an updated set of images to be pushed to Percy. We have our baseline or our snapshots in Percy terms. And now we're just looking at the comparison and the review cycle within Percy itself. Okay, as we say, Percy's slightly different. It's not making those comparisons there. It's taking the DOM, uploading it to the Percy engine, and then making those comparisons within the Percy app itself. So this test will actually run quicker than the Applitools test will. All right, let's see what's going on in the console. So we can see that Percy's started. We've taken another snapshot for each of the home page, the listings page, the product details page, and we've pushed those results to Percy. Percy stopped. We've finalised a build number 455. So if I flip over to Percy now, 454 was our baseline build. So if I just do a hard refresh here within Percy itself, we're looking for 455 now. There it is. Now it tells me it's actually processing. All right, so it's now doing the comparison. So I am going to need to wait for that to take place. Build 454 was our snapshot build. You remember that I approved that. So we will just pause while this processing completes. We were just waiting there whilst the Percy processing took place. Build 455 a couple of minutes ago. Again, same thing. 3 snapshots or 3 images that it's captured, and they're in an unreviewed state. Okay, here was my approved build or my baseline build before that. Let's click into this and see what it's telling us. Okay. And again, the same principle, right? So you're getting familiar with this now. It's going to show me areas of red where it has found visual discrepancies. Okay. We've got page by page ability to review now. And again, you can look within different browsers as well. So this is currently set to Edge. If I looked at Firefox, it's probably a similar. It could potentially have a slightly different representation, but actually no, it's showing the same things. All right, so yeah, what this has focused on here, interestingly, is potentially different to what Applitools was showing us. These are 3 different engines, right? So they are going to show slightly different discrepancies in a different way. But nonetheless, the process is for you to go through. This is a bit more obvious, okay? We have a completely different section there. All right, before on the left we had related products section, and now we're essentially looking at a grouping of products that are frequently bought together. Now, you know, as I say, as far as this test is concerned, not a problem, because you know we're expecting the dynamic nature of this page. But you can see how and why it highlights these differences. Okay, so essentially in this case, just different layout, things in a different order. Results listings page. Again, these are highly susceptible to change and to, you know. And in fact, this is a moving carousel on the top of this page, so it was probably sliding in at a particular time. All right, let's just scroll down and see what else. Yeah, not surprisingly, you know, differences of ranges of products. Actually, what's interesting here, these are actually the same sections on this listings page, but it thinks it has detected a certain amount of change, or at least something that's worth you casting your eye over. Now, I think we can probably look at this very quickly and say, no, that is essentially the same thing. There's not a problem. This, again, a bit more definite here, right? So whereas on the left, the third from the left section was the electronics store widget, and actually now it's the garden accessories widget. The fourth was essential software, and now it's handcrafted and personalized products. And again, a completely different section here. So often repurchased in pet supplies versus best sellers in home and kitchen. So quite clearly, you know, why it's telling you about these differences. All right, so we won't spend too long on this, but I could look through this and say, yeah, that's fine. I'm expecting that. Again, these are probably areas that in your real world applications, if you knew you had a rotating carousel or something that was changeable, you would mask that area for exclusion in the actual visual comparison. Okay, and then let's just have a quick look at the results listings page. So actually that was just the product details page we were just on. And now this is the results listings page. So again, some things there that are not so obvious, that you and I would look at and say, actually, no, there's no different. That is the same. That's the same image. That's the same heading. And it could be that it was just upon page load and it wasn't in the kind of pixel by pixel, same location within the screen. But nonetheless, it's going to highlight those for your attention. Yeah, this is kind of interesting. So we've got the same 4 deck chairs on the left here, but actually on the rightmost image, we had 2 kind of these zero gravity chairs here. We've got 2 of these, but actually on the right hand side now, it's a completely different product. So yeah, it makes sense that that's been highlighted. All right, nonetheless, that's our process. As I say, you do have the options here in Percy to look on a browser by browser basis. That may show you some different discrepancies, so always worth looking at these different representations. And you have different kind of resolutions that you can play with here as well. But ultimately, the process is one and the same. So I come here and say, I'm fine with all of that. I'm going to approve that build. Okay. I come back to my home page, and there we go. We've got 2 approved builds, a baseline build and a subsequent build. Again, Percy offers the ability that if I run a 3rd iteration of this and the images are exactly the same, it can and will auto approve those for me. Okay. But certainly, if you want to dig a little deeper into either Applitools or Percy, I've been showing you today, I've been driving this all through Test Evolve, Spark and Flare. We looked at Halo earlier on as well for local visual testing with Test Evolve, Spark and Flare. What's nice with a framework like this is that it's effectively plug and play, right? So you have, all you've got to do, as you've seen, is drop in your API key, set up your test for run, and then you're immediately stepping into these other applications to make these comparisons and these build approvals. But of course, you can integrate with Applitools or Percy with other automation frameworks, right? So if you come to the SDK page for Applitools, it's going to tell you about everything that is supported, frameworks that you can work with. Okay. And likewise, if we come on to the Percy docs, all right, so all integrations, so it tells us here that certain types of frameworks, so Ember, Rails, Selenium for Python, Selenium for Java, Cypress, WebDriver, IO, Puppeteer. All right, so you've got a whole variety of options here. Within Test Evolve Spark and Test Evolve Halo, we've done all of that hard work for you, so you don't have that set up. You open a brand new project, you record a new test, you record a visual check whilst you're recording that test, drop in your API key, and you are good to go, as we've just seen. Okay, but yeah, so that's what the process will look like in Percy for you. Okay, 3 different engines we've looked at effectively. They all do things slightly differently, but yeah, certainly worth exploring with all 3, I would say. Okay. Right, so I think we'll draw to a close now, but let me start by thanking you for your time. So the whole idea of this session was really just to give you just a starting introduction to everything about visual regression testing, really. Ideally, we're looking at the idea of incorporating that within your existing automation tests. With a framework like Test Evolve, Spark, Flare, and Halo, that's very easily done. All right, that hard work is done for you, and you can plug and play effectively. But we did also touch upon support for many other frameworks there. You've only got to look at the Percy or the Applitools documentation to understand. But however you choose to kind of move forward with this, you really just want to see it as an extension of your functional automation. The way in which we implement it is with a single additional line of code with a label, as you saw, that represents a page on your application. But ultimately, you'll run a test, you'll have a baseline, you'll get some comparable images, and you then need to step in and make that determination as to whether you accept or you reject that build. And of course, if you rejected it, then you'd be raising a bug off the back of that. Okay, you can take this several steps further in terms of fully integrating this as part of your CI/CD pipeline. All right, that's definitely another topic for another day. But just know that with all of these tools, that is very much possible. All right, so yeah, thank you once again. With Test Evolve, we do offer a fully featured free 90-day trial. So just come and pay us a visit at testevolve.com. If you want to dig a little bit more into our setup and our configuration and what we support and the other features that we offer, then go and check out our GitHub pages. Obviously, hit us up on social media. We have a wealth of content on our YouTube channel now. Visual testing being just one of them. Okay, so we'd love to hear from you. Sign up, give it a try. You could be up and running in no time at all. Okay, so if you like this webinar, then please give it a thumbs up. Maybe subscribe to our YouTube channel. There'll be plenty more content coming throughout the year. Okay, so thank you very much, and look forward to catching you soon.